more AOC, more litigation, and more allegations. All discussed here on today's episode of the show. I'm Josiah Everton, and this is The Glorious Rescue.
Aren't you tired of feeling forced to choose between staying informed and being indoctrinated? Listen to the condensed news cycle without the lies, agendas, and confusion from the mainstream media, all while engaging in deeper discussions about the principles that have influenced our great nation. This is what rescuing America looks like. This is The Glorious Rescue.
Merry Christmas. And with this very wonderful December episode, I wanted to wish you all a very Merry Christmas. And because of that, because we are celebrating the season, in today's episode of the show, we are going to have some Christmas presents for you. And not physical Christmas presents. Josiah, what kind of presents? Cash, money, signatures of me, my autographs? No, we're not doing materialistic gifts. In fact, I'm going to be giving you ideological gifts, and that means some good news, some funny news as we roll through the news cycle today, and then finishing it off with an end of show segment that has been promised to all of you. Definitely in our last episode, we've missed it, and I think even in the previous few episodes. So we are getting back to it. So a few of those Christmas presents for you. So stay tuned as we join in and as we continue today's episode of the show. The very first one being a very Merry Christmas, a very wonderful Christmas present for all of you as listeners, is a recent Joe Biden presentation. Joe Biden claiming himself now as the president-elect. I'm going to get into this with YouTube and all that and how they play into it. But his presentation and his wonderful show where he presented the wonderful Javier Becerra, whatever his name is, as his new Secretary of Education and Healthcare, I think it was. Just listen in.
And I'm grateful to the members of my COVID team that I'd like to introduce to you now, who will lead the way. I'm really proud of this group. For Secretary of Health and Education Service, I nominated Javier Becerra, excuse me.
That's going to wrap up. I'm just going to show that very brief clip. I'm very proud of this team. For Secretary of Education and Health, I was going to present Javier Becerra. He still couldn't get it right. He couldn't get the title right. Couldn't get the name right. Poor guy's got to be Secretary of Education and Secretary of Health. And poor guy, he's led by a guy who can't read a teleprompter and can't even pronounce his own name. Nevertheless, Javier Becerra being pronounced the, head of department of one of those departments. And who knows what his actual name is. Nevertheless, I wanted to start off with that for all of you as we listen in this Christmas season for a little bit of a Christmas gift. And as we do so, give you a little bit of another one, and that is AOC. And I do have to apologize. I'm really, really sorry, guys, because we talk about AOC often. And I think the reason why I like to do so is to give a little bit more lightheartedness on the show, be a little bit more joking around, because that's exactly what AOC is. She's a joke. But anyways, this most recent story is a story that goes back actually, I want to say a few months ago. Goya Foods, I think that's how you pronounce it. Anyways, it's a big box food company. And so AOC called him out because the CEO and president of Goya Foods came out as being like a Trump supporter, said Trump likes to build the nation or whatnot. And AOC tried to lead this boycott. And the company profits ended up going up, I think about 1,000%, the CEO said, 10 times revenue, because AOC brought attention to the company. And so they came out and said that. In fact, she was named the Employee of the Month of Goya Foods because of her wonderful work. And she really honestly did more for the company than anyone else. Any of their employees, she did so much better for them, increasing the revenue by so much. How did AOC respond when this was announced? She tried to pass it off and switch subjects because she likes to say she's not a politician and then does exactly what politicians do. She said, when asked for a response, she just basically said, no, I just Googled how to make my own food so I don't have to buy food from this company, basically. And then here's what she said after. But of course, Fox would rather indulge their made-up fantasies than acknowledge that in the Trump administration's catastrophic response to COVID, blah, 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 goes on and immediately flips back to Trump, his response to the COVID pandemic and the millions of people rushing to buy canned goods. Well, if you really cared about people rushing to buy canned goods, then why are you forcing the American people or calling on the American people to boycott a canned goods food company? That makes absolutely no sense. So that's what we're rolling with AOC. That's what we're rolling with Joe Biden. Give you a couple of those laughs, a couple of those Christmas gifts as we roll into something a little bit more serious because it affects the show. Guys, this could be very unfortunate for us because back in 2016, if I wanted to sit here and report on Russian collusion in the 2016 election, and that's why Trump got elected, and I wanted to do so for 3 years, even if I wanted to do it right now, even though there's been FBI investigations that have come up saying that there's absolutely nothing there, and there have been hundreds of pages of reports completely vindicating Donald Trump and Russian collusion, I could do that right now, and I'd be fine on YouTube. Nevertheless, if I wanted to entertain the idea of possible election fraud, as of today, as of yesterday, actually, December 9th, I know I'm dating this episode now, then I could be banned. Guys, this could be the very last episode of The Glorious Rescue on YouTube. Don't get me wrong, we're going to be on all the audio platforms, but guys, this could be the last one on YouTube. And so unfortunately, I had to bring my Don't Tread on Me shirt for YouTube, because if there's anything I want, it's for YouTube to just keep treading harder. Please, YouTube. Big Brother, which Big Brother's more so the government, but tread harder, please. Continue to tread on the American people, continue to tread on free speech. Again, private companies can do as they will, but then you have to label yourself as a media company, filtering, publishing content, and you cannot produce, you can't come up with user agreements, licensing deals, and file yourself as a social media platform when you are acting as a media company. That's what you are. So that's the whole reason with the whole debate. Again, private companies can do what they will, but we can be censored because they don't want me talking about it. I don't think they really have the time to go through my channel with not as many views. But anyways, YouTube could be censoring this channel, could be blocking it because we want to entertain the idea of election fraud. Even though if I wanted to not even entertain, but absolutely promulgate the idea of Russian collusion, even though it's a complete nothing burger, I could do so completely unfiltered, unbarred, and probably even promoted by the YouTube algorithm. But the second I want to talk about election fraud possibility, but the possibility of it, or the second I want to talk about, which we're going to talk about in a brief second, Chinese intervention and aid into high terraces of the United States government, that's a no-no. YouTube said as of December 8th, you can't do that because states have certified their election. I'm not even really going to get into it completely, but here's kind of what they said. They said, quote, this is the statement from YouTube, quote, yesterday was the safe harbor deadline for the U.S. presidential election, and enough states have certified their election results to determine a president-elect. Given that, we will start removing any piece of content uploaded today or any time after that misleads people by alleging that widespread fraud or errors change the outcome of the 2020 U.S. presidential election in line with our approach towards historical U.S. presidential elections. Hold on a second. They're basically saying we're going to start removing misinformation, or what they deem misinformation, just like they have, and just like their approach has been throughout their history as a company in U.S. presidential elections. Yeah, right, YouTube. Yeah, right. Back in 2016, I hope you guys were censoring the content about Russian collusion. I hope you were, even though there was substantially less evidence. No, wait a second. Hold on. No evidence of Trump colluding with Russia. And now, 2020, all of a sudden, you're going to try to be the thought police. It's inconsistent that they don't follow their own rules. And it's actually factually incorrect to say that the harbor deadline, the safe harbor deadline, was December 8th, because this is somewhat unprecedented, but basically it goes back to courts. It goes back to state legislators. And so no, YouTube, you can't just label this as a safe harbor deadline and then trying to deem it whatever you will. Again, this could have ramifications on the show, and if it does, we'll continue to update you. If you don't see us on YouTube or you see content starting to be removed, I highly doubt it, but if so, because again, I'm just going to make the statement like I've always made on the show, that there's the possibility. We're just entertaining the possibility. We're not claiming that widespread voter fraud caused a change in who was elected. We're just saying that here's some evidence. Maybe it did. Let's entertain it because, we as Americans have the right to freely think for ourselves, but apparently Big Brother, apparently YouTube does not think so. And moving right along, like I mentioned in the intro, we're now going to be talking about those litigations. Again, what are we simply doing here on The Glorious Rescue? For you, YouTube, your algorithm, or however you're trying to filter the content, all I'm doing here is talking about the litigation because of state laws being changed. That's all I'm talking about, YouTube. I'm not even talking about fraud in this episode. Now, if I feel like it, I might. But I'm again going to talk about the possibility of it. So Texas filed a lawsuit. Good old Texas. And it's funny because I plan out what I'm going to say for these episodes quite often in advance on multiple days on end. And then my content, I get beat to the punch because these episodes only release every Tuesday and Friday. And obviously other shows release them daily or multiple video clips a day. So sometimes I get beat to the punch. Sometimes I am the punch. I think I mentioned, we talked about Donald Trump possibly taking my content. I don't know, can't claim it. But Donald Trump might have done the exact same thing this past week when he referenced the same media report that I did about how media intervention and suppressing of certain stories did radically change voter turnout for Joe Biden. We talked about that. Definitely check out that episode with Jeremiah Evertson back a couple episodes ago if you want more information on that. But going back to this, so yes, they might be copying me, but so I come up with these different things and then they're taken from me. So I'll put it out there that I recently heard from someone basically saying, thank God for Texas. Where would our country be without Texas? I start to think, where would our country be without California too? Without the pull of California, without the pull of a lot of the liberal states, but then also, where would our country be without the good old Texas? So yeehaw, we are getting into a few of these stories. Texas filed a lawsuit against several of the swing states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Georgia, if I'm not mistaken. Basically what it is the state of Texas filed the lawsuits saying that you, in the middle of the game, changed the rules. This is exactly right, 100% right. I don't know why there weren't so many lawsuits for this area specifically. There are a lot of lawsuits about specific ballot issues and specific procedures and policies, but not really a lot of litigation in regards to this specific item. And this, I think, is the big one here and the important one. And so I'm glad Texas is doing this. And now several states are getting on board. Last I checked, I want to say it was well over a dozen states getting on board. Obviously, that's going to change as this episode uploads to YouTube and you will see it. But many states getting on board here. What is this piece of legislation? Basically what it is the state of Texas saying, like I said, you can't change the rules in the middle of the game. You have state election laws in Pennsylvania. Specifically, let's just take Pennsylvania for ease of illustration. And they have certain laws. They have certain not ballot harvesting, but ballot counting laws that they can only count mail-in ballots with certain signatures and signatures matching and deadlines and postmarks, all these different items. And they have to tally ballots according to those state election laws. And those state election laws, whether they be federal, whether they be those state election laws, they have to be adhered to. And yet in the middle of this, the governor of these respective swing states and also the Supreme Courts or the courts of these states started changing the rules. Pennsylvania court, for instance, started ruling like you can count certain ballots that aren't postmarked or ballots that don't match signatures or start not worrying about signatures, those types of rules, right? And those were held up by certain courts, state courts, sometimes even the Supreme Court, or by the governors or the state departments of those respective states. And so they basically changed the rules. That has to be done through the state legislators because if it is a state election law, if you want a law to be changed, what branch of government, going back to 6th grade political science, what branch of government writes the laws? It is the legislative branch. Therefore, it must be the legislative branch that changes the laws. It's the duty of the executive branch to enforce them and the judicial branch to interpret them in regards to the Constitution of that state. For the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Courts, and then obviously for the United States Supreme Court, the United States Constitution. I know I'm giving a little bit of quick information, but what I'm trying to basically say is that the federal government, the governorships of those states, did not have the right to change those rules in the middle of the game. And so with that, it must have been held up by the state legislators. They were the ones who should have and had to have changed the rules for them to be valid. On top of that, if it were in contrast with the constitution of that state, then those states would actually have to pass amendments to their constitution, which are substantially harder. Like in the United States Congress, you have to have a much larger majority. In state legislators, it may vary, but you have to have different amounts of votes, different majorities. Sometimes, or if you want it, you can do it by state persons' conventions, people's conventions. What I'm trying to say is it's substantially harder. And it can't just be done through the signing of a pen by the governor. It can't be done by a simple decision from that state Supreme Court. It has to be done through the legislators, through the amendment process, if it's through the Constitution, or just by an updating of the law or a revisioning of the law, if it is a state election law. Many states, like I have said, now taking a deep breath coming from that, like I have said, basically many states have come on board with this. at the time I'm recording this, it's been over a dozen, I want to say 17 or something like that, states getting on board and basically agreeing on this and getting into this. What that means is, because you have a state suing another state, it has to go through federal courts. You can't just have, because obviously that there's been a precedent set there. Texas cannot sue Michigan and then that be held in a Texas court. That wouldn't be fair. Or it be held in a Michigan court. That wouldn't be fair either. So it has to go up the federal courts. Ultimately, obviously, this is now going to go to the Supreme Court. Very obvious here. So again, I go back to a very simple truth. If there's enough evidence for this to swing the election, it will swing the election. Again, YouTube, big if there. But what I'm trying to say is that the conspiracy theorists, they're not sounding so far-fetched now. They're not sounding really like conspiracy theorists, also including the whole conspiracies about Chinese officials and spies being in top tiers of our government. Well, starting to come to fruition here. They're not sounding so far-fetched. They might not be so far off on this one. Nevertheless, these are good signs, because if the evidence is there, it will be found out in the Supreme Court. There's no more excuses. There's no more chance, I think, honestly, I think, for it to escape. If it's substantial enough for the election to swing, it will swing at this point. So that ought to be the prayer of all conservatives, of all Christians, and that would be the route that should be taken. Because if this goes in favor, I would imagine that the result of this would be that the Supreme Court would mandate that the laws should be upheld. That's what the court is for, is saying, no, you must uphold the law, the constitutionality of your respective states. And then therefore they would have to recount only the ballots that would adhere to those state elections and in their respective states, which would be balloting issues and fraudulent and voter rolls, all that kind of stuff. This would be like a one catch-all, not just individual pieces of legislation. I'm not going to continue on this because I've already spent an exorbitant amount of time, and I have one more brief story before heading into our end of show segment. So now we got that taken care of. Again, this will be the more all-inclusive piece of legislation, or should I say court decision, that we all ought to be looking to. That is the one to focus on. Now I'm just going to briefly talk about some of the possibilities of Chinese spies in our government, the United States government. And this is crazy to me, because I try to look for this video of a Chinese official basically saying, oh, it doesn't matter whatever way the elections go, or something along those lines. I can't find it in my mind. It's a little bit more ambiguous, but something along the lines of, we basically have plants in their government anyways, and we can influence how we want anyways, so it doesn't really matter type thing. I was looking for it, I wasn't able to reference it, and I'm starting to wonder if it's because the thought police YouTube might have taken it down. I can't figure that one out, guys. I mean, we can't talk about the possibility of voter fraud, any little bit of voter fraud in our election, even though there's mounting evidence, but we can't find videos of a Chinese official literally saying that this is what they are doing. I can't wrap my head around that one, guys. If you're able to figure that one out, please let me know. Send me a direct message over on Instagram, by the way. Don't forget to follow, quick plug there, us on Instagram over at The Glorious Rescue. And also you will see the link in the bio there to some of the most recent YouTube videos. Nevertheless, there are recent reports coming out about Chinese plants, an individual, a Chinese spy with the last name of Fang or Fong, however you pronounce it. And according to an Axios report, was getting close to a Swalwell. That Swalwell is a congressman who sits literally on the Intelligence Committee. I can't get over this. But it goes back many, many years. There's the possibility of like romantic relationships, but definitely many different types of correlations and relationships to many individuals in our United States government. I'm not really going to get into it because you'll see this information all over the place, and I don't want to spend too much time on it. And we'll continue to update you as we get more information on it, as always. But basically, Swalwell has accused the president of literally everything. Turns out, everything that he's accusing Donald Trump of is probably what he is doing, is literally what these bombshell reports are coming out and saying that he is doing. Intervention or correlation with foreign governments and spies from foreign governments, sits on the Intelligence Committee, and he's possibly leaking, although we can't say that he's leaking information. And some people are coming up with some interesting theories. Like, for instance, Kevin McCarthy, who's the House Minority Leader in Congress, Republican, basically says that this individual sits on the House Intelligence Committee, and yet he was placed there by Pelosi. Does Pelosi know? Is Pelosi involved? All these different theories. We'll find out. Hopefully, we will find out. We won't find out if Joe Biden's president. That is for sure. Nevertheless, that is going to wrap up our I guess you could say, the first portion of the show before we briefly, just very briefly, head over into an end of show segment of the founding era. Welcome back to another segment, a long-awaited segment, and also a long planned for segment of the Glorious Rescue, and now unfortunately, or of the founding era, now unfortunately that we are here, I have a very limited amount of time, and it is not, I guarantee you it's not because we went too slowly through the information, or that I did not speak quickly enough, because I am sure this information could be more readily grasped if it were played on lower speed, because I'm talking quite quickly, but we're just going to briefly go through the 14th and 15th Amendments, traveling through the amendments, and who knows how much time we have, really, honestly, but 14th Amendment basically says, well, I'll give you a brief summary of it. All persons born or naturalized in the United States are, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside, and then basically saying that those citizens are guaranteed and cannot be deprived life, liberty, or property without due process of the law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. This is a big one, due process of the law for citizens. And then basically defining what a citizen is, everyone who is basically here by blood or by land, you are a United States citizen and you cannot be deprived life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That is really honestly what the election is all about, right? It's finding that due process of law, because we don't want to be deprived of our liberty, the right to vote, of our property, of our life. We don't want to be deprived our right to a free and fair election, and that's why we're seeking due process of law. It is interesting to note that one of the few presidents who really restricted due process of law was actually Abraham Lincoln, someone who I'm a big fan of, very big proponent of Abraham Lincoln and his work, but he did do a lot to restrict the rights of states. He also did do a little bit of restricting of due process of law and martial law. He did do that. He was one of those presidents, and some of those effects are still in place today, but we are guaranteed really beautifully due process of law, the rule of law in America, not the rule of tyrants, not the rule of Chinese individuals or Chinese spies, not the rule of Joe Biden, but the rule of law. And lastly, the 15th Amendment to the Constitution says the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. This is a big one. 13th Amendment basically freed everyone of servitude, basically said and abolished slavery. But that did not mean that those slaves were basically citizens and could vote, and that's what the 15th Amendment did. So that's what it did. And in later amendments that we'll discuss, the poll taxes were eradicated, so you could not, basically poor people couldn't vote because they couldn't pay the taxes, and all of these different measures in later amendments. But this amendment specifically gave everyone, every citizen, the right to vote, no matter their race, their creed, their religion, basically their color, no matter if they were a slave. You had the right to vote because you are an American citizen. Right? It goes back to the idea of individualism in America. Individual responsibility, individual rights. Good principles. I'll talk about a bad principle in our next end of show segment of the founding era, which will not necessarily be the next episode. We could get into other segments for end of show segments. We could do, teach the speech, the vast past, all these other ones. But when we go into our next segment of the founding era specifically, we're going to talk about a bad principle. One that boils my blood. You will have to tune in every Tuesday and Friday, because I don't even know when the next segment of the founding era will be. But when it is, we're going to talk about something that boils my blood, a bad principle, something that will very, very much frustrate you. I hope so, as it has frustrated me. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to tune in every Tuesday and Friday for more. We will be back here with all of the latest. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Josiah Evertson, and this is The Glorious Rescue.